In the deepest winter of 1592, when snow fell like silence over the rooftops of Krakow, a young king sat alone in the chambers of Wawel Castle, staring at a letter he could not bring himself to burn. The wax seal had already been broken. The words inside were few, but they carried the weight of something unnameable, something that would follow him through every decision, every marriage, every war, every whispered rumor that would ripple through the courts of Europe for centuries to come. The letter was from his sister, and in the flickering candlelight, Sigismund III Vasa, King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, allowed himself a moment of weakness. He closed his eyes and remembered her face. History does not often concern itself with the inner lives of kings. We know their battles, their treaties, their marriages arranged like pieces on chessboard. But there are spaces between the recorded facts, shadows that no chronicle can fully illuminate. And in those shadows, there are secrets. Secrets that shape nations. Secrets that bind souls. Secrets that, if spoken aloud, could unravel the very fabric of legitimacy upon which crowns rest. This is a story about one such secret. It begins not in Poland, but in the cold, Lutheran north in the Kingdom of Sweden, where two royal children grew up in a world fracturing along religious lines. Sigismund was born in 1566, the son of King John III of Sweden and Catherine Jagiellon, a Polish princess whose Catholic faith would become the defining tension of her son's life. 3 years later, in 1568, Anna Vasa was born into the same household, the same strange blend of Swedish Protestantism and Polish Catholicism, the same atmosphere of devotion and division. They were not ordinary siblings. From their earliest years, Sigismund and Anna were isolated together in a way that royal children rarely experienced. Their father's court was a place of political intrigue and religious strife. Their mother, Catherine, was a woman of deep faith and quiet strength, determined to raise her children as Catholics in a kingdom that was rapidly embracing the Reformation. She taught them Latin and prayers. She whispered to them of their Polish heritage, of the great Jagiellonian dynasty, of the faith that must never be abandoned no matter the cost. And so Sigismund and Anna grew up as allies in a hostile world. They shared tutors. They shared prayers. They shared a language that their Swedish cousins could not speak and a faith that made them strangers in their own land. In the long, dark winters of Stockholm, when the days were brief and the nights stretched endlessly, they had only each other. They read together by candlelight. They argued theology with a passion that startled their tutors. They walked together in the palace gardens, speaking in Polish, planning futures that seemed impossibly distant. Anna was not beautiful in the conventional sense. Contemporary portraits show a woman with a strong jaw, intelligent eyes, and an expression of quiet defiance. But those who knew her spoke of something else, something harder to capture and paint. She had presence. She had a mind that could match any scholar's. And she had an intensity of devotion, both to her faith and to her brother, that bordered on the absolute. Sigismund, meanwhile, was a young man caught between worlds. Tall, somber, deeply religious, he carried himself with a gravity unusual in someone so young. He was being groomed for greatness, but the nature of that greatness remained uncertain. Would he inherit Sweden? Would he claim Poland through his mother's lineage? Will he be forced to choose between his father's kingdom and his mother's faith? In 1583, when Sigismund was 17 and Anna was 15, their mother died. Catherine Jagiellon's death was not unexpected. She had been ill for some time, but it shattered the fragile world the siblings had built. Their father, John III, withdrew into his own grief and his own political maneuverings. The Swedish court became colder, more suspicious of the Catholic prince and princess in its midst. It was in this period of mourning that something shifted between Sigismund and Anna. Those who served them noticed it, though they could not quite name it. The siblings became inseparable. They attended Mass together every morning, often in private rather than in the public chapels where Lutheran nobles watched with disapproving eyes. They took meals together in Anna's chambers rather than in the Great Hall. They were seen walking together at strange hours, deep in conversation, oblivious to the winter cold. Rumors began, as rumors always do in royal courts. At first, they were innocent enough. The siblings were grieving. They were finding comfort in each other. They were isolated by their faith and their foreign bloodline. But as months turned to years, the whispers took on a different tone. There was something unwholesome, some said, in how the prince looked at his sister. There was something possessive in how Anna guarded access to Sigismund, dismissing ladies-in-waiting and secretaries with a sharpness that seemed almost jealous. In 1587, everything changed. Sigismund's uncle, Stephen Bathory, King of Poland, died without an heir. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, that vast and unusual realm where kings were elected rather than inherited, needed a new monarch. And through his mother's bloodline, Sigismund had a claim. The Polish nobility, always suspicious of foreign rulers, but even more suspicious of each other, saw in the young Swedish prince a compromise candidate. He was a Jagiellon through his mother. He was a devout Catholic. He was young enough to be molded, or so they thought. But there was a problem. To accept the crown of Poland, Sigismund would have to leave Sweden. He would have to leave Anna. The negotiations took months. Ambassadors traveled between Stockholm and Krakow, carrying demands and counterdemands, promises and threats. Sigismund's father, John III, wanted guarantees that his son would eventually inherit Sweden as well, creating a vast Catholic empire stretching from the Baltic to the Carpathians. The Polish nobility wanted assurances that their new king would respect their freedoms, their privileges, their right to be ungovernable. And through it all, Anna watched. She attended the meetings when protocol allowed. She read the correspondence that Sigismund shared with her. She offered counsel that her brother valued more than that of any ambassador or bishop. Those close to the siblings reported that Anna was not merely supportive of Sigismund's ambitions. She was the architect of them. She was the one who crafted arguments, who identified weaknesses in opposing positions, who whispered strategies that Sigismund would later present as his own. Some historians have suggested that Anna saw in Sigismund's potential kingship a path to power for herself. In an age when women were excluded from most forms of direct political authority, becoming the sister of a king was one of the few ways to exercise real influence. But those who knew Anna spoke of something deeper than mere ambition. They spoke of devotion. They spoke of a bond that transcended the normal affection between siblings. One Swedish courtier, writing years later in his private memoirs, described a scene that he claimed to have witnessed in the summer of 1587. He had gone to deliver a message to Prince Sigismund and, finding the prince's chambers empty, had gone to Princess Anna's apartments. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, he saw Sigismund and Anna seated together on a low couch, their heads bent close together, speaking in low voices. As the courtier watched, uncertain whether to interrupt, Anna reached out and took her brother's hand. She held it with both of hers, raised it to her lips, and kissed it with a fervor that seemed to the observer more appropriate for a lover than a sister. Sigismund, for his part, closed his eyes and whispered something the courtier could not hear. Then Anna released his hand, stood, and moved to the window, her back to her brother, her shoulders shaking as though she were crying. The courtier withdrew without delivering his message. He never spoke of what he had seen, except in those memoirs written decades later, when all the principles were long dead and the truth, if there was a truth, had been buried beneath layers of history and interpretation. In December of 1587, Sigismund was formally elected King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. He was 21 years old. The weight of the crown settled on him like a prophecy he had always known would come to pass. But before he could be crowned, there was the matter of the journey. He would have to travel from Sweden to Poland, through hostile territories, with only a small retinue. And he would have to leave Anna behind, or so everyone assumed. What happened next remains one of the strangest episodes in the early years of Sigismund's reign. Against all advice, against all protocol, against the explicit wishes of his father and the Polish ambassadors who had come to escort him south, Sigismund insisted that Anna accompany him to Poland. Not as part of his household, not as a visiting princess, but as an essential member of his inner circle, a counselor whose presence was non-negotiable. The Polish delegation was baffled. What role would a Swedish princess play in the court of the Polish king? Anna was not married. She had no official position. She could not advise on matters of state without causing scandal. And yet Sigismund was adamant. Without Anna, he suggested, he would not go to Poland at all. In the end, a compromise was reached. Anna would travel with Sigismund to Krakow for the coronation. She would remain for a period of months, helping her brother establish his household. And then, when appropriate, she would return to Sweden to attend to her own marriage prospects. Except that Anna never returned to Sweden. The journey from Stockholm to Krakow in the winter of 1587 was brutal. The roads were frozen. Bandits prowled the forests. The small party had to navigate through territories controlled by hostile nobles and suspicious local authorities. And through it all, Sigismund and Anna traveled together, often sharing a carriage, huddled against the cold, speaking in low voices about matters that their attendants could not hear. One member of the traveling party, a young nobleman named Stanislav, kept a diary of the journey. His entries are brief and focused mostly on practical matters, the condition of the roads, the quality of the accommodations, the health of the horses. But occasionally, he includes observations that hint at something stranger. On January 14th, he writes that the prince and princess took a private supper together in their shared chambers at an inn near Gdansk, dismissing all servants and remaining together until nearly midnight. On January 20th, he notes that Princess Anna was unwell and that Prince Sigismund personally tended to her, refusing the assistance of physicians or ladies-in-waiting. On January 28th, he records that the party was delayed by a full day because Prince Sigismund refused to continue the journey while Princess Anna remained in a state of agitation, the cause of which was unknown. They arrived in Krakow on February 7th, 1588. The city was dressed in celebration, banners and flowers despite the cold, crowds lining the streets to catch a glimpse of their new king. Sigismund rode at the head of the procession, regal and composed. Behind him, in a covered carriage, Anna watched through curtained windows, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. The coronation took place a week later in the magnificent Wawel Cathedral. Sigismund was anointed and crowned with all the ancient ceremony that the Polish kingdom demanded. He swore oaths to protect the faith, to respect the privileges of the nobility, to rule with justice and wisdom. And throughout the entire ceremony, Anna sat in a place of honor near the altar, her eyes never leaving her brother's face. After the coronation, the question arose again. When would Princess Anna return to Sweden? The Swedish ambassador pressed the issue. King John III sent letters demanding his daughter's return. There were matters of her potential marriage to attend to. There were diplomatic considerations. Her continued presence in Poland was becoming awkward. But Sigismund delayed. He claimed that Anna was unwell and could not travel. He claimed that her advice was essential as he established his new government. He claimed that the roads were too dangerous, that the political situation was too unstable, that the time was not right. Months passed. Anna remained in Wawel Castle, occupying apartments adjacent to the king's own chambers. She attended Mass with Sigismund every morning. She was present at private councils, sitting quietly in the corner, listening, occasionally offering a comment that Sigismund would seriously consider. She walked with him in the castle gardens in the evening, the two of them always slightly apart from the courtiers who followed at a respectful distance. The Polish nobility did not know what to make of her. She was not the queen. She was unmarried and politically unattached. She was not a mistress. Her virtue was never questioned in that regard. She was not even officially an advisor. She held no title, no position. And yet she was there, always there, a constant presence at the new king's side. Whispers began to circulate. They were different from the whispers in Sweden, more pointed, more dangerous. In Poland, where the nobility prided themselves on their freedoms and their right to question even kings, rumors could not be so easily suppressed. People began to ask questions. What was the nature of the relationship between the king and his sister? Why did he keep her so close? Why did he consult her on matters of state? Why did he seem unable to make decisions without her input? Some dismissed the gossip as the inevitable result of envy and misunderstanding. The king was young. He was in a foreign land. It was natural that he would rely on the one person he truly trusted. Others were less charitable. They pointed to the way Sigismund looked at Anna. They noted the hours they spent together in private. They observed that the king seemed to have no interest in taking a wife, despite the urgent need for an heir. In the summer of 1588, the pressure on Sigismund to marry became intense. The Polish nobility made it clear that the king must produce an heir. Alliances needed to be formed. Dynasties needed to be secured. A list of potential brides was drawn up, princesses from across Catholic Europe, each with their own advantages of blood and politics. Sigismund reviewed the list with apparent disinterest. He delayed meetings with ambassadors. He found excuses to postpone decisions. And through it all, Anna remained at his side, watching, listening, saying nothing. It was during this period that a remarkable document surfaced, a letter from Anna to a confidant in Sweden, a woman who had been her lady-in-waiting before the journey to Poland. The letter, which was later discovered in a private archive and published by historians in the 19th century, offers a rare glimpse into Anna's state of mind. She writes of her life in Krakow with a mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. She describes the beauty of the castle, the richness of the court, the power of being close to the center of authority. But she also writes of isolation, of being surrounded by people who do not understand her, who view her with suspicion. She writes of her brother with a depth of feeling that is startling even across the centuries. She describes him as the only person who truly knows her, the only soul to whom she can speak without pretense or fear. And then, in a passage that has been analyzed and debated by scholars for generations, she writes this: "There are bonds that transcend the ordinary ties of blood. There are unions of spirit that the world cannot comprehend and would not forgive if it could. I am his, and he is mine, in ways that no crown, no church, no law of man can alter. God knows the purity of what we share, even if the world would call it by darker names." What did she mean? Was she speaking of a deep spiritual connection, the kind of intense sibling bond that can form under conditions of shared trauma and isolation? Or was she hinting at something more transgressive, something that could not be spoken openly? The debate has raged for centuries, and no definitive answer has ever been found. In the fall of 1588, Sigismund finally yielded to the pressure and agreed to consider marriage. Negotiations began with the Habsburg court for a possible match with Anna of Styria, an archduchess known for her piety and political connections. The Polish nobility was pleased. The diplomatic wheels began to turn. But Anna Vasa did not return to Sweden. If anything, her position at court seemed to solidify. She began to take on unofficial roles, mediating disputes among noble families, corresponding with foreign courts, even influencing ecclesiastical appointments. She became, in effect, a shadow queen, wielding influence without title, power without official sanction. And Sigismund allowed it. More than allowed it. He seemed to need it. Those who observed the king closely noted that he was a man of deep melancholy and intense religious devotion, given to long periods of prayer and self-examination. He was not a natural politician. He did not enjoy the compromises and deceits that royal power required. But with Anna at his side, he seemed capable of functioning. Without her, he withdrew into himself, becoming indecisive and distant. The marriage negotiations with Anna of Styria dragged on for years. There were complications involving dowries, political alliances, religious guarantees. Sigismund seemed in no hurry to conclude them. Meanwhile, Anna Vasa continued to occupy her apartments in Wawel Castle, her presence a constant source of speculation and gossip. In 1592, an event occurred that seemed to confirm the worst suspicions of those who questioned the relationship between the king and his sister. King John III of Sweden died, leaving the Swedish throne technically in the hands of his son, Sigismund. But Sigismund was in Poland, ruling his elected kingdom, and he could not be in two places at once. The Swedish nobility, increasingly Protestant and increasingly hostile to their Catholic king, demanded that Sigismund either return to Sweden and rule as a Protestant or abdicate the Swedish throne. It was a crisis that threatened to destroy everything Sigismund had worked for. If he lost Sweden, he lost half of his patrimony, half of his identity. If he returned to Sweden and embraced Protestantism, he betrayed his mother's memory and his deepest religious convictions. It was an impossible choice. And once again, Anna was at the center of his decision-making. She argued passionately that he must not compromise his faith. She counseled him to appoint a regent in Sweden and trust that time would resolve the religious divide. She wrote letters on his behalf, crafting arguments that balanced political necessity with religious principle. But the Swedish nobility would not be placated. They demanded Sigismund's presence. And finally, in 1593, Sigismund made the difficult decision to travel to Sweden and attempt to secure his throne. This time, Anna did not accompany him. She remained in Krakow, officially because someone needed to oversee the Polish court in the king's absence. But those close to the situation whispered that the real reason was different. Sigismund could not risk bringing Anna to Sweden, where the rumors about their relationship were already widespread and where his enemies would use any scandal to undermine his claim to the throne. The separation was agonizing for both of them. Letters traveled between Poland and Sweden with remarkable frequency. Sigismund wrote to Anna almost daily, long letters filled with political analysis, religious reflection, and personal revelation. He described his loneliness, his frustration with the Swedish nobles, his longing to return to Poland. And in nearly every letter, he asked for her counsel, her comfort, her prayers. Anna's letters in return were equally revealing. She advised him on political strategy. She encouraged him in his faith. And she wrote of her own suffering at their separation in terms that, once again, seemed to exceed the bounds of normal sibling affection. In one letter, preserved in the Polish royal archives, she writes, "Every day without you is a kind of death. The castle is cold. The court is empty of meaning. I attend to my duties as though in a dream, waiting only for the moment when I will see your face again. There is no one here who understands. There is no one who can know what we are to each other." Sigismund's attempt to secure his Swedish throne was a disaster. The Swedish nobility, led by his uncle Charles, Duke of Södermanland, made it clear that they would not accept a Catholic king who ruled from Poland. Religious riots broke out. Political factions hardened. And despite months of negotiation and compromise, Sigismund was forced to return to Poland in 1594, his position in Sweden weakened, and his future there uncertain. He returned to find Anna waiting for him in Krakow. Their reunion was noted by several courtiers, all of whom described it in similar terms. Anna had been standing at the castle gates when Sigismund's party arrived. As the king dismounted from his horse, she walked toward him with measured steps, her face composed but her eyes bright with tears. Sigismund stood frozen for a moment, simply looking at her, and then, disregarding all protocol, all the watching eyes of the court, he strode forward and embraced her. It was not a formal embrace, not the kind of greeting one might expect between royal siblings. It was tight, desperate, prolonged. Anna's head rested against her brother's chest. Sigismund's hand cradled the back of her head. They stood that way for what seemed an eternity to the observers, oblivious to everything around them. Later that evening, they attended Mass together in the private royal chapel, and then they retired to Sigismund's chambers, where they remained in private conversation until the early hours of the morning. The years that followed were marked by increasing turmoil. Sigismund's hold on Sweden continued to weaken, culminating in his eventual deposition in 1599 and the ascension of Charles IX to the Swedish throne. Wars erupted. Alliances shifted. The religious divide between Catholic and Protestant Europe deepened. And through it all, Anna remained at Sigismund's side. She never married, despite numerous proposals. She never left Poland, despite multiple opportunities and invitations to return to Sweden. She devoted her life entirely to her brother and his reign. In 1592, Sigismund had finally married Anna of Austria, a match that produced children and secured the succession. But the marriage did not diminish Anna Vasa's influence or her position at court. If anything, the presence of a queen seemed only to highlight the unique nature of Anna's relationship with the king. Queen Anna of Austria was the mother of the heir. But Anna Vasa was something else entirely: advisor, confidant, the keeper of secrets, the one person Sigismund truly trusted. There are accounts of tensions between the two Annas, though they were always carefully managed and never allowed to erupt into open conflict. Queen Anna of Austria understood, as all the court understood, that there were aspects of the king's life and heart to which she would never have access. Those belonged to his sister, and no wife could compete with a bond that had been forged in childhood and tempered by shared suffering. Anna Vasa lived in the royal castle until her death in 1625. She was 56 years old, and she had spent 37 of those years in Poland, nearly her entire adult life, never returning to the land of her birth. In her final years, she became increasingly reclusive, attending Mass, corresponding with religious figures, and spending long hours with her brother when his duties allowed. When she died, Sigismund was devastated. Courtiers reported that the king, normally so composed and controlled, wept openly at the news. He insisted on personally overseeing her funeral arrangements. He had her buried in Wawel Cathedral, among the kings and queens of Poland, an honor that was technically inappropriate for an unmarried foreign princess, but one that no one dared to question. In the months after Anna's death, Sigismund seemed to age years. He withdrew from public life as much as his duties allowed. He spent hours in prayer before her tomb, and he began to speak, in his private correspondence, about his own approaching death with a sense of relief, as though he were finally being released from a burden he had carried for too long. Sigismund III died in 1632, 7 years after his sister. In his final testament, he left instructions that certain private papers be destroyed. Among them were all of Anna's letters to him, hundreds of them, accumulated over decades. The testament was executed faithfully. Whatever Anna had written to her brother in those intimate communications was burned, the secrets committed to ash and silence. But even with those letters gone, the questions remain. What was the true nature of the relationship between Sigismund III and Anna Vasa? Were they simply siblings bound by extraordinary circumstances, by shared faith and shared isolation, by the peculiar pressures of royal life? Or was there something more, something that crossed boundaries that their age would have considered not merely scandalous, but sinful? The historical evidence is ambiguous. There are the observations of courtiers, filtered through prejudice and limited understanding. There are the surviving letters, passionate and intense, but capable of multiple interpretations. There are the undeniable facts of Anna's lifetime spent at her brother's side, her refusal to marry, her extraordinary influence, and the king's obvious dependence on her presence. But there is no confession, no definitive proof, no smoking gun that would allow us to say with certainty what transpired in those private chambers, during those long conversations, in the depths of that bond that everyone acknowledged but no one could quite explain. Perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps there are some secrets that history has no right to expose, some intimacies that should remain veiled even after centuries have passed. Or perhaps the truth is more complex than our categories of sin and virtue can contain. Perhaps Sigismund and Anna shared something that was neither purely innocent nor wholly corrupt, but rather a third thing, unnamed and unnameable, that existed in the space between. What we can say with certainty is that their relationship shaped the course of nations. Sigismund's policies, his religious convictions, his political strategies, all bore the mark of Anna's influence. The wars he fought, the alliances he forged, the choices he made that affected millions of lives across Poland, Lithuania, and Sweden, all were made in consultation with his sister, with a woman who knew him better than anyone else alive. And we can say that their bond, whatever its nature, was powerful enough to withstand the pressures of royal duty, the demands of dynastic obligation, the whispers of scandal, and the judgment of their contemporaries. It endured from childhood to death, unwavering and absolute, a connection that neither marriage, nor kingship, nor even the threat of eternal damnation could sever. In the end, Anna Vasa remains one of history's enigmas. She left no diary, no memoir, no public justification for her choices. She simply lived her life according to her own understanding of duty and devotion, and she let the world make of it what it would. And the world, predictably, made many things of it. Protestant propagandists used the whispers about Sigismund and Anna to paint him as a degenerate Catholic tyrant, a man whose devotion to Rome had corrupted even his family relationships. Catholic apologists defended the siblings vigorously, insisting that any suggestion of impropriety was the malicious invention of heretics and enemies of the faith. Romantic writers of later centuries cast them as tragic lovers, victims of circumstance and cruel fate. Sober historians have tried to parse the evidence dispassionately, seeking truth in the fragments of documents and the silence between them. But perhaps the most telling detail is this. In Wawel Cathedral, where the kings and queens of Poland lie in elaborate tombs adorned with their accomplishments and their virtues, Anna Vasa's resting place is marked by a simple stone. There is her name, her dates, and nothing more. No titles, for she had none. No list of achievements, for officially she had none. No husband, for she chose none. Just her name, and the fact that she lies among royalty, placed there by her brother's command. Nearby, in a far more elaborate tomb, lies Sigismund III, surrounded by the symbols of his two kingdoms, his battles, his long reign. But those who visit the cathedral sometimes notice that the two tombs, though separated by the width of the chapel, are positioned in such a way that if you stand at a certain angle, they seem to align, as though reaching toward each other across the cold stone floor. Whether this arrangement was intentional or merely accidental, no record states. Like so much else about Sigismund and Anna, it exists in that space between certainty and speculation, inviting interpretation but resisting conclusion. And so we are left with questions. Questions about love and loyalty, about the boundaries of family, about the secrets that powerful people keep and the reasons they keep them. We are left to wonder about the conversations that took place in those private chambers. The words spoken in Polish that no Swedish courtier could understand, the glances exchanged across council tables, the letters written late at night and read by candlelight. We are left to consider what it means to be bound to another person so completely that your life becomes unintelligible without them. What it means to find in a sibling not just family, but friend, advisor, confessor, and the keeper of your deepest self. And what it means when that bond, so essential and so powerful, must be hidden, explained away, defended against the judgment of a world that has no category for what you share. The silver crown of Poland, the crown that Sigismund wore for 45 years, still exists, preserved in a museum behind glass. It is a beautiful object, ornate and heavy, studded with jewels that catch the light. Tourists photograph it, scholars study it, but the crown keeps its secrets. It does not speak of the weight of decisions made by the man who wore it. It does not reveal the whispered consultations that preceded those decisions. And it does not tell us what Sigismund saw when he looked at his sister, or what she saw when she looked at him. Perhaps there are some things that crowns, like history itself, cannot hold. Perhaps there are truths too intimate, too strange, too human to fit into the grand narratives we construct about kings and kingdoms, wars and weddings, rises and falls of dynasties. But if we listen carefully in the silence between the documented facts, in the spaces where the official histories have nothing to say, we might hear something. An echo of passion that could not be contained. A whisper of devotion that could not be explained. A suggestion that beneath the weight of crowns and the demands of power, there were two people who found in each other something irreplaceable, something that sustained them through exile and war, through scandal and loss, through all the long years of their parallel lives. And in that echo, in that whisper, we might find a kind of truth. Not the truth of facts and dates and documents, but the truth of the human heart in all its complexity, its capacity for love in forms that defy convention, for loyalty that transcends reason, for connections that bind souls together in ways that the world may condemn but cannot truly comprehend. Sigismund III and Anna Vasa lived and died centuries ago. Their bones lie in that cathedral in Krakow, still and silent, beyond the reach of scandal or speculation. But their story endures, a puzzle without a definitive solution, a mystery that invites us to ask questions about the nature of love, the limits of permissible affection, and the secrets that shape the hidden history of the world. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the questions themselves are the point. Perhaps we are meant to wonder, to speculate, to imagine what it might have been like to be them, caught between duty and desire, between the public face required by the crown and the private truth known only to each other. History remembers Sigismund III as a king who fought wars and lost kingdoms, who defended Catholicism and shaped the destiny of Eastern Europe. But in the end, perhaps his truest self was known only to one person, a woman who shared his blood and his secrets, who stood beside him through everything, and who carried those secrets to her grave. And in the silent spaces of Wawel Cathedral, where the dead kings sleep, two tombs stand in quiet alignment, a reminder that beneath the grand sweep of history, beneath the chronicles and the controversies, there are always the intimate human connections that defy our categories and resist our judgments. Connections that were lived in whispered conversations and exchanged glances, in letters now burned and moments now lost to time. The silver crown still gleams behind its glass. The questions remain unanswered. And the secret, if there was a secret, rests beneath the stone floor of that ancient cathedral, guarded by silence and the passage of centuries, known only to the two who shared it and the God to whom they both, in their own ways, devoted their lives.